The Ishtar Gate of Babylon was a wall of brilliant blue-glazed brick, its towers lined with striding lions and dragons molded in relief, and it was built for a festival. In Berlin today, the reconstructed gate still stops visitors cold. In ancient Babylon, it opened onto the processional way, a paved avenue more than half a mile long, bordered by the same shimmering blue tiles, and wide enough for a crowd to pour through in ceremony. It looks like the purest statement of royal power the ancient world could manage, but the gate and the avenue were not built to glorify a king. They were built for Babylon's New Year festival, the Akitu. Every spring, Babylon gave itself over to days of feasting, music, and ritual renewal, and the heart of it all was a procession. Here is the crucial part. The architecture did not come first, with the celebration squeezed into whatever was left. The festival's schedule and symbolism dictated the design. The avenue existed so statues of the gods could be carried through the city. The gate existed so the divine procession could enter in proper splendor. The temple complex was rebuilt repeatedly to host the ceremony. The celebration supplied the calendar, the funding, and the purpose. The stone followed. Now, it would be easy to treat this as one city's exceptional devotion, but the same pattern appears across the ancient world, in cultures that never exchanged a single word. From the Nile to the Andes, festivals pushed societies to build stadiums, theaters, temples, terraces, and entire ritual landscapes. That is a clue to something important about how ancient people cooperated, what they considered sacred, and why they poured generations of labor into structures designed to outlast them. So how did the Akitu festival actually work, and what exactly did it build? Every spring at the start of the new year, Babylon replayed its creation story. The city's patron god, Marduk, was carried from the Esagila temple out to the Bit Akitu, a ritual house in the countryside where ceremonies bound the king's authority to the god's favor, and the world was symbolically reset. Then Marduk was brought back through the city, and his return meant order was restored across the cosmos. That journey was the festival, and the festival was why the city built. A god could not be hauled through dirty back streets. Marduk needed a route wide enough for the procession, smooth enough for the sacred vehicles, and grand enough to announce that divinity was passing through. So the processional way was laid out as a stage, paved with limestone slabs and lined with high walls of glazed brick. Every animal molded into those walls was a piece of theology. The lions belonged to Ishtar, the bulls to the storm god Adad, and the long-necked dragons were the symbol of Marduk himself. As the crowd moved with the god along the avenue, they walked through a permanent illustration of the festival's story. Then came the point where the procession re-entered Babylon, the Ishtar Gate. King Nebuchadnezzar II rebuilt it on a staggering scale, and his own inscriptions record that he covered it in glazed tiles and paved the processional street with stone so the ceremonies could pass with fitting majesty. This was not royal vanity. It was festival infrastructure built because the celebration demanded a worthy threshold for the god's return. The Akitu's demands did not stop at the city walls. The Bit Akitu itself, the countryside house where the ritual reached its climax, was its own monumental complex, expanded again and again by kings who wanted to host the new year with greater glory than their predecessors. The Ishtar Gate is usually celebrated as a masterpiece of Babylonian art, but it was never meant to sit in a museum. It was a working part of a yearly performance. The avenue, the gate, the temple, and the festival house all existed for one fixed idea. Renewing the world required a permanent road for the gods. Babylon's most famous monuments were the props of a celebration. And the same conviction, in a different form, was already pressing into stone in another civilization far to the west. 4,500 years ago, an architect working for Pharaoh Djoser built the step pyramid at Saqqara, the earliest truly monumental stone complex in history. The compound around it contains something unexpected: a running track. A vast open court is lined with stone posts that would look familiar to any athlete because they were made for the Sed festival, a ritual in which the aging king had to sprint a course to prove he could still rule. This was the Heb Sed, the pharaoh's jubilee of renewal, first held after 30 years on the throne and then repeated at intervals. The run was the centerpiece. Standing in the open court, surrounded by the emblems of the gods, the king raced between boundary markers. Afterward, he helped raise the Jed pillar, a heavy symbol of stability linked to the god Osiris, to renew the order of the world. The festival was in effect a public reboot of the kingship, a way of declaring that the kingdom itself was being made new. A king's final monument did not need a running track. So why set one in stone at Djoser's complex? Because the complex was never built only for the king. It included a row of dummy chapels with sealed doors, a wide open festival ground, and at one end a stepped platform where the king could sit enthroned and watch the whole performance. All of it is arranged like the spaces of the Sed itself. The most convincing reading is that Djoser's architect Imhotep turned the Jubilee into permanent architecture, a stage where the king's renewal could be reenacted in stone forever. Egypt's earliest monumental stone architecture was festival infrastructure, built before the Great Pyramids, before the temples of Karnak, because a celebration of renewed kingship demanded a permanent home. The festival left a long shadow. For the next 2,000 years, pharaohs kept the Heb Sed alive, adding jubilee halls to temple complexes like Karnak and raising sun temples such as Niuserra's at Abu Ghurab, whose walls still show the king sprinting through the same ritual run. But the Sed belonged to the king, staged inside his own compound. Egypt's gods would not stay so contained. They went out among the people in festivals that moved across the land, and for them, the builders of Egypt would soon create something grander than a royal court. The gods of Egypt did not stay locked inside their shrines. Once a year, in the festival called Opet, the greatest of them moved among the people. It came in the season of the flood, when the Nile rose over the fields, and Ammon, with his wife Mut and their son Khonsu, was due to travel from Karnak to the temple of Luxor, nearly 3 kilometers away. This was no private ceremony. Priests carried the divine barques on their shoulders while musicians, dancers, and crowds pressed around them. For generations, the journey was made on the water, a river procession of gilded boats. But the river made an unreliable stage. A low flood could strand the barques. A strong flood could make the passage dangerous. The festival was fixed to the sacred calendar, not to the weather, so the builders of Thebes did something extraordinary. They turned the journey itself into a monument. A broad avenue was paved between Karnak and Luxor, surfaced with sandstone and running for nearly 3 kilometers through the city. On either side stood more than 1,000 sphinxes, many crowned with the ram-horned form of Ammon, their carved bodies stretching in long silent rows. Small stations and chapels marked the route as places where the procession could pause and the bark could rest. What had once been a boat trip across open water had become the most monumental street in the ancient world. The scale is enormous, but the purpose was practical. Once the road existed, the Opet festival could unfold exactly when it had to, independent of the river's mood. The gods could not be delayed by drought or flood, and because the avenue ran through the heart of the city, everyone could witness the divine journey, lining the route in a way impossible from the banks of the Nile. The reliefs carved in the colonnade at Luxor still show that day, the bark raised high, the priests and dancers in step. But the true record is the road itself, lost for centuries and now restored to view. The festival had not just used the landscape, it had built a new one. Across the sea, the Greeks were ready to carry this same instinct further. In Greece, the same instinct found a different master. Not a king or pharaoh, but the citizens of a democratic city. When the Athenians rebuilt after the Persian Wars, they built in the shadow of a festival. Every 4 years, the city staged the Great Panathenaic, its grandest celebration in honor of Athena, with athletic contests, chariot races, and competitions in music and poetry. But the centerpiece was the procession. A new peplos, a robe woven by the young women of the city, was carried through the streets across the Agora and up to the Acropolis, where it was presented to the ancient wooden statue of the goddess. That journey was so central to Athenian identity that the city carved a permanent route for it. The Panathenaic Way began at the Dipylon Gate and ran more than a kilometer through the heart of Athens, all the way to the Temple Rock. This was no ordinary street. It was a broad, graded ceremonial road, wider than nearly every other path in the city, and maintained over centuries for a single recurring event. In a city of narrow alleys, this road was the exception. Then came the Parthenon. The temple is often treated as pure architecture, pure beauty, but its builders made a strange choice. Around its inner walls, high above the columns, ran a frieze. In nearly every Greek temple, that space would show scenes from myth, gods battling giants, heroes fighting Amazons. The Parthenon showed something else. It showed the Panathenaic procession itself, horsemen, elders with olive branches, young women carrying offerings, musicians, and the cattle chosen for sacrifice. Hundreds of figures, most of them ordinary citizens of a real city, walking in a celebration that actually happened every 4 years. Myth had been pushed aside. The temple's decoration belonged to the people of Athens. That was the discovery at the heart of the Acropolis. The Parthenon was not merely a house for Athena. It was a permanent record of the civic body that honored her, democracy made visible and framed in marble. The festival had not just used the city, it had written itself into the city's very center. But that was not the only way celebration reshaped Athens. The city's other great festival would demand a building designed for a different kind of crowd, not people moving through space, but people packed together in stillness, watching. Packed together in stillness, watching. That was the challenge the city Dionysus set for Athens. Every spring, the city honored Dionysus with dramatic contests, and poets staged tragedies and comedies before the whole citizen body. Drama did not begin in a theater, though. The earliest performances took place in the Agora, where spectators crowded onto temporary wooden scaffolds until one ancient account records those scaffolds collapsing mid-performance. Safety and scale demanded a permanent answer. The festival moved to the south slope of the Acropolis, into the sanctuary of Dionysus himself. There the Athenians carved inward instead of building upward. The hillside became the seating, the flat ground at its foot became the orchestra where the chorus danced, and behind it stood the skene, a plain structure for actors and props. The theater was invented as a permanent building type because a festival needed to hold the whole city safely in one place. Over the next generations, wood became stone. The Theatre of Dionysus held well over 10,000 spectators in a city whose voting population was barely a few times that size. The design worked so well it became the template for the Greek world. The slope carried the weight, the orchestra gave every seat a clear view, and the acoustics carried every word to the highest rows. From Sicily to the coast of Asia Minor, cities founded their own dramatic festivals, faced the same problem, and arrived at the same hillside solution. The theater joined the marketplace and the temple as a standard feature of the Greek city. The competitive energy also spilled beyond the theater itself, as wealthy citizens financed choruses and commemorated victories with monuments so numerous they lined the street of the tripods, where the monument of Lysistrate still stands. But the theater rested on one fixed assumption: the crowd would stay put. A hillside carved into a bowl is perfect for people who come to watch. the other great festivals were about to make a very different demand. They needed places where crowds could move, where athletes could run, where thousands of bodies in motion required space no carved hillside could provide. The Olympic Games began with a single runner, no stadium, no stone seats, no temple roof. By tradition, the first games were a simple foot race in a meadow beside the Alpheus River, sacred ground to Zeus, and the prize was a wreath. The earliest recorded victor ran around 776 BCE. For a long time, that was the entire festival, but a foot race held every fourth year, protected by a truce that let rival Greeks travel in peace, drew more competitors. Wrestlers, boxers, charioteers, each new event demanded new space. The stadium gained earthen embankments for spectators, stone starting blocks, and a vaulted entrance tunnel. A long hippodrome was laid out for chariot racing, though the river's shifting course has long since swallowed it. Training required covered halls, so a gymnasium and a palaestra rose beside the sanctuary. The festival's growth dictated the buildings, not the other way around. Olympia was not a city in any ordinary sense. It had no resident population, no marketplace, no daily civic life. It existed for one purpose. Every fourth year, crowds in the tens of thousands arrived, and the site briefly became one of the largest gathering places in the Greek world. Then the visitors left and the buildings waited. Everything there was festival infrastructure. The most spectacular piece was the Temple of Zeus, paid for with war spoils after the Eleans defeated their rivals. Inside stood the cult statue by the sculptor Phidias, a seated Zeus in gold and ivory so colossal that, according to the traveler Pausanias, his head nearly touched the ceiling. Ancient writers ranked it among the 7 wonders of the world, yet the temple was only the summit of an entire support system. Competing Greek cities raised small treasury buildings along a terrace, each a permanent advertisement for its home city. The guest house called the Leonidaean offered rooms for dignitaries around a colonnaded courtyard. Bathhouses appeared among the earliest public bathing buildings in Greece, because thousands of spectators in summer heat were a practical problem no god could solve. Accommodation, hygiene, display, rivalry, all of it hardened into architecture around the festival's schedule. That pattern, a sanctuary shaped entirely by a recurring festival, became the template for the other great gatherings of the Greek world. Each would adapt it to different gods, different needs, and very different ground. No sanctuary tested that template on rougher ground than Delphi. When the Pythian Games grew into one of the great Panhellenic gatherings, the builders had no plain to work with. Delphi clung to the southern flank of Mount Parnassus, where the ground fell away into a deep gorge. Every level surface had to be coaxed from the living rock with terraces and retaining walls before a single column could rise. The result was a festival landscape built for ascent. The sacred way began at the sanctuary gate and climbed the slope in a deliberate zigzag. Its turns were lined with treasuries. City-states from across the Greek world, Athens among them, raised small marble buildings here, each a permanent dedication in a festival that was itself a competition. The Athenian treasury still stands, its reliefs worn but readable, a reminder that this was where cities performed their status before the god. Victory funded monuments, and the monuments advertised the cities behind them. Every bend of the route displayed the latest score in stone. At the center stood the Temple of Apollo, raised on a terrace so steep that the retaining wall alone became a monument. Its polygonal stone blocks locked together so tightly that after more than 2,000 years, the joins are still crisp. Hundreds of official inscriptions later covered that wall, turning the terrace into a public archive. The festival's character determined what rose above the temple. The Pythian Games had begun as a purely musical event, and the theater took its place on the slope just above, its stone seats following the curve of the mountain. Athletics joined the program later, and when they did, the stadium was carved into the highest ground of the sanctuary. its rows looking out over the theater, the temple, and the valley far below. Every fourth year, pilgrims, performers, and athletes made the climb, and the order of buildings told them how the festival had grown. The Amphictyonic League, a council of Greek communities that guarded Delphi, secured the peace and funding that let this complex grow and rebuild across many generations, even after earthquakes and wars had taken their toll. But the real discovery is what the terrain did to the festival's memory. Forced to stack vertically instead of spreading across a plain, Delphi kept every stage of its games visible at once. The oldest contest stayed beside the temple, the newest climbed to the summit. Walking the sacred way, a pilgrim was literally reading the biography of the festival in stone. At Epidaurus, the healing sanctuary of Asclepius, the festival pushed Greek engineering to a new level because it demanded something the Greek world had rarely achieved. A performance space where thousands of people could hear a single voice with total clarity. Epidaurus was not a great political capital. It drew its strength from the sick. The heart of its ritual involved patients sleeping in a long colonnaded hall called the Abaton, where they waited for the god to visit their dreams and reveal a cure. The temple, the round tholos, and the healing halls all served that quiet, personal process. But the Asclepiad festivals changed the scale. Athletic contests, horse races, musical competitions, and dramatic performances drew crowds from across the Greek world, and those crowds needed seats, sightlines, and sound. The answer was the theater of Epidaurus, the most complete ancient Greek theater to survive. Its seating fans out wider than a half circle and climbs the hillside in more than 50 rows, divided by a single walkway. Below, the orchestra forms a perfect continuous circle, a shape rare among surviving theaters. Around 12,000 people could take their places here, and every seat offered an unobstructed view of the performers. The engineering discovery is the sound. Modern acoustic research has shown that the rows of porous limestone act as a natural filter. The stone absorbs low-frequency noise, the restless shuffle and murmur of a huge crowd, while reflecting the higher frequencies of the human voice. An actor speaking at the center of the orchestra can be heard clearly in the very top rows, while the audience's own noise seems to cancel itself. Visitors still test this today. The sound of a coin dropped on the orchestra stone is reportedly audible at the back of the theater. The sanctuary did not need this theater for healing. It needed it because the festival drew the sick and the healthy at the same time, and the entire event depended on one voice reaching 12,000 listeners. The theater of Epidaurus was the festival's most demanding piece of infrastructure, and the builders answered with a machine of stone so precise that it still performs its original function. Every summer, audiences take those ancient seats, and the stage speaks to all of them at once. Epidaurus held 12,000 people. Rome built for 150,000. Long before the Colosseum, Rome had a festival that outranked all others. The Ludi Romani, the Roman Games, were the city's oldest celebration, held for Jupiter Optimus Maximus, supreme god of the state. Tradition traced them to the earliest republic, and public money funded them as the centerpiece of the religious calendar. The games opened with a procession that set the pattern for Rome's monumental skyline. Magistrates, priests, athletes, and charioteers assembled at the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. They marched through the Forum and descended into the valley between the Palatine and Aventine Hills, where the Circus Maximus waited. That valley had held races since the age of the kings, a simple stretch of open ground. But the festival would not allow it to stay simple. As the Ludi Romani grew from one day into many, adding performances and more races, the venue grew with them. Every time the crowd outgrew the space, Rome rebuilt. By the 1st century BCE, the wooden track was giving way to stone. Under the emperors, the circus became a vast arena. Tiered seating climbed the slopes of both hills. A monumental central barrier divided the arena, with water displays, shops, and shrines in the outer arc. Ancient writers claimed 250,000. Modern estimates are closer to 150,000. Even at the lower figure, it was the largest public venue the ancient world ever produced. It existed for one non-negotiable reason. The Ludi Romani were a sacred obligation. Jupiter's games had to happen every year because a broken promise to the city's protector god was unthinkable. So the temple had to stand, the route to the valley had to stay open, and the arena had to be maintained generation after generation. The festival created an enduring axis at Rome's center, with the god on his hill, the spectacle in the valley, and a processional road joining them. Civic events reused that route for centuries. That is the discovery hidden in the circus's ruins. The festival turned a flat stretch of valley into a monument that could hold an entire city's population. It taught every later generation that worship, spectacle, and civic life belonged in one structure on the grandest scale. The circus was that idea made permanent. But even more permanent than racetracks were the processions that would literally pave the city with memories. Rome's greatest festival wasn't on the calendar. It was the triumph, the celebration granted to a victorious general. For one day, the entire city turned itself into a stage. Outside the gates, the army waited because no armed force was allowed inside. Then the column moved, soldiers, wagons loaded with captured treasure, prisoners of war, and at the head of it all, the general in his chariot. The procession crossed the Forum, climbed the sacred way, the Via Sacra, and ended before the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, where the conqueror laid his honors before the god and the city feasted. The route was fixed. It had to be because the triumph's meaning depended on following the same sacred path every time, and because the route had to endure, the city made it permanent. The Via Sacra was repaved and monumentalized over centuries, not for daily traffic but to carry processions. Rome maintained a ceremonial spine mainly so the celebration could keep happening. The same logic multiplied temples. Before battle, generals made vows. If I am victorious, I will build you a temple. Triumph meant the debt came due, and the generals paid by raising new sacred buildings across the city. The Temple of Fortuna Primigenia, the Temple of Venus Genetrix, both began as battlefield promises fulfilled in the glow of public celebration. With every triumph, another permanent structure entered the Roman landscape. And the triumph invented one of the most copied forms in all of architecture, the ceremonial arch. The Arch of Titus, standing on the Via Sacra even today, commemorates the joint triumph of Titus and his father Vespasian. Its reliefs show soldiers carrying spoils from the captured temple in Jerusalem. But the arch was never merely a monument to the past. It stood directly on the route, so every later triumph passed beneath it, layering fresh meaning onto older stone. The deepest surprise is this: we usually assume a city exists first and festivals happen inside it. Rome worked in reverse. Temples rose because of vows made in the hope of a future celebration. Arches rose to preserve the memory of past ones, and the Via Sacra was maintained generation after generation for one reason, so the procession could always happen again. The festival didn't just occupy the city, it built the city stone by stone, celebration by celebration. Far to the east, a different kind of festival produced a different kind of infrastructure, built not around temples and arches but around the meeting point between land and water. The great bathing festival called the Kumbh Mela is a Hindu pilgrimage that rotates among 4 sacred river sites across India. Today it is the largest religious gathering in human history, and it was enormous long before the modern era. A Chinese pilgrim in the 7th century who traveled through the subcontinent described crowds at the sacred confluence of the Ganges and the Yamuna so vast they seemed beyond counting. People came to bathe at the most auspicious moments, and they kept coming generation after generation. The festival city itself is almost entirely temporary. A pilgrim settlement rises out of the river plain, hosts millions, and then disappears. But the infrastructure that contains the crowd is permanent. At Haridwar, where the Ganges leaves the mountains, rulers across many centuries sponsored long stone embankments and stairways, the ghats, so that enormous numbers of pilgrims could walk safely into the water. These were gifts of piety, a way for kings to store up religious merit and honor the gods. But they were also serious engineering. A riverbank that can absorb millions of people without collapsing has to be graded, paved, drained, and reinforced. The same logic reshaped other sacred cities. At Varanasi, the Dashashwamedh Ghat, a monumental cascade of stone steps on the Ganges, was built and expanded over centuries to carry ritual processions and the endless tide of bathers. Today, it is one of the most recognizable riverfronts in the world. Here, though, is the complication. The ghats, the roads, and the water systems are permanent, while the megacity they serve appears only at intervals. This is infrastructure built for a city that spends most of its time absent. That arrangement depended on great rivers. So what happens when a festival requires a sacred body of water that nature never provided? When the river refused to cooperate, builders found another way, and that choice produced some of the most extraordinary water architecture in India. The answer took shape in stone in the South Indian town of Kumbakonam. The Mahamaham festival demanded a body of water more sacred than any single river, and nature had not supplied one. So the builders of this town created it by hand. Legend holds that the gods once churned the cosmic ocean, and a pot of nectar rose from the deeps. That pot, the Kumbha, was set down on this ground, and some say the town's name remembers it. Once every 12 years, when Jupiter enters the sign of Leo, the myth renews itself. At that moment, every sacred river in India is believed to flow invisibly into Kumbakonam's temple tank. Pilgrims who bathe then are not washing in ordinary water. They enter the Ganges, the Yamuna, the Godavari all at once, so the festival's real demand was architectural. The rite needed a vessel large enough to hold that imagined convergence and convincing enough to make it feel real. The Mahamaham tank is that vessel. A vast stone basin with steps descending into the water on every side, ringed by more than 20 shrines and pavilions. Sacred wells sit within the water, named for rivers and deities, so that a single walk around the tank passes the whole holy geography of India. That much water and stone demands constant care. The basin must hold its water through the dry season, stay clean enough for enormous crowds to enter, and its embankments must bear the press of thousands. Across the centuries, the temples and rulers who sponsored the festival dredged, repaired, and rebuilt, treating the tank as a permanent public work. And that reveals the finer logic of Kumbakonam. The tank was built for an event that happens once a generation. For 11 years, it is a calm pool in a temple town. Then, for a few days, it becomes the center of a gathering vast enough to test a modern city. The builders could not move the planets, and they could not summon the rivers. But they could carve a basin, line it with stone, and give a myth a permanent place to become real. At Kumbakonam they did. Across the world, in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, the festival stage at the center of the city followed the opposite rule. It had to grow. The Templo Mayor, the great pyramid with its twin shrines to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, was never a single finished building. At least 7 major construction phases lie inside it, each one covering the temple that came before. The Aztec answer to an aging, sacred structure was not restoration. It was a new building placed over the old, bigger than before. The reason was the festival year. Toxcatl, one of the most important ceremonies of the Aztec calendar, revolved around a man chosen a year in advance to embody the god. He was dressed in sacred regalia, honored in the palace, and treated as a living image of the divine. At the climax of the festival, he was sacrificed on the summit, and the god's power was understood to renew itself for another cycle. In Aztec understanding, the order of the world depended on these rites. That moment depended absolutely on the architecture. The rite had to be performed high above the city, in full view of the crowds packed into the plaza below. So the pyramid expanded with the ritual calendar. Each new phase of construction gave the great annual ceremonies a higher, grander stage, and those ceremonies in turn demanded the next phase. Rulers added layers to mark victories, accessions, and turning points in the city's fortunes, and every addition was consecrated through festival rites. The same festivals were the great public display of conquest, when captives and tribute were presented before the gods, and a taller temple magnified the awe of that moment. Excavations have recovered offerings inside nearly every stage, masks, vessels, and precious objects placed to sanctify the new stone. The work of building each layer was itself a sacred event, engaging the city in labor that carried the meaning of prayer. The Templo Mayor offers a different way to picture a pyramid. Usually we imagine a monument finished at a particular moment, then standing still. This one was never finished. Its purpose was renewal, and the renewals were festivals. The pyramid the Spanish saw in 1519 was just the latest skin stretched over centuries of celebration. Underneath lay the whole history of Tenochtitlan's ritual year, layer after layer, each sealed in stone as the record of a festival that had come and gone. On the winter solstice in the high Andes, the sun appears to die. Day by day it climbs lower over Cusco, its arc shrinking toward the horizon until it hangs at its weakest point. Then, just as dread takes hold, it turns, the days lengthen, the world tilts back toward warmth. For the Inca, that turnaround was not astronomy. It was survival, and the festival that met it was Inti Raymi, with processions and offerings that pulled the empire toward its capital. The center of everything was the Coricancha, the courtyard of gold, the temple of the sun in Cusco's heart. The Spanish who saw it before it was transformed wrote that its walls gleamed with gold, and the building itself was aligned to the sky. At the solstice, the first light struck the temple along a precise line, confirming the sun's return. This was not decoration. It was the mechanism that made the festival real. But the sun demanded more than a temple. It demanded food. Inti Raymi consumed staggering amounts of maize, brewed into beer for the feasts and offered to the god, so the Inca rebuilt the landscape to supply it. Around Cusco and through the sacred valley, they carved stepped terraces into the mountainsides, bound by stone walls and fed by irrigation. At Moray, they sank concentric rings of terraces into the earth, creating microclimates in what many scholars read as an agricultural laboratory, growing the special crops the rituals demanded. The terrace was not separate from the festival. It was infrastructure as essential as the altar, and above Cusco rises Sacsayhuaman, 3 zigzag walls of stone so massive and so precisely cut that they fit without mortar. Some blocks weigh more than 100 tons. For a long time this was called a fortress, and it did play a role in the Spanish siege, but the layout and the colonial accounts point to something more. Broad plazas could hold thousands, and the Spanish chroniclers recorded festivals held there, with the Inca ruler presiding as the sun broke over the peaks. The zigzag walls may have echoed lightning, the sun's celestial power, and the platforms were built for offerings, not only defense. Sacsayhuaman makes most sense as the ceremonial heart of the festival, raised against the sky. Other peoples built monuments for their festivals. The Inca built a world for theirs. Terrace, canal, temple, and platform were one machine, designed to feed, glorify, and receive the sun's return. The festival lasted only days, yet it organized an entire engineered landscape. Every element had to be perfect and true, but permanence was not the only answer the ancient world found. Across the Pacific, another culture pursued the same goal with a completely different logic, one where the greatest monument is not what remains, but the act of renewal itself, repeated until the building becomes the proof of faith. Japan answered with a different kind of permanence. At Ise, on the island of Honshu, the holiest shrine in Shinto is not an ancient building. The one standing today was completed in 2013. The shrine before it was deliberately dismantled. An exact copy was raised on the ground beside it, using the same unpainted hinoki cypress, the same nail-less joinery, and the same proportions. That cycle has repeated itself every 20 years or so for more than 13 centuries. The tradition is called Shikinen Sengu, and it is a festival that is also a construction project. The reason lies in what the shrine is for. Ise is dedicated to Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and Shinto tradition holds that the divine presence is best honored in a home that is always fresh and pure. Wood weathers, weakens, and decays, and that is precisely the point. The building is reborn before it can grow old. That freshness is not symbolic. It demands a real rebuild carried out on schedule using the same exacting methods. Two identical plots sit side by side within the compound. For 20 years, one holds the shrine. Then the new building rises on the second. The old one is dismantled with ceremony, and the emptied ground is covered in white gravel until its turn comes again. But Shikinen Sengu is more than a simple ritual. Every cycle takes years of preparation and draws on tens of thousands of skilled hands. There are carpenters who raise great timber buildings without nails, weavers who produce the sacred textiles, metal workers, roof thatchers, and crews who move enormous logs through the forest. There is also the forest itself. The shrine maintains groves of hinoki cypress managed for centuries, with trees marked and reserved for rebuilds that will happen long after the people who planted them are gone. The approach roads, the bridge across the Isuzu River, the workshops where ritual objects are remade for each cycle, and the storehouses are all permanent fixtures, quietly maintained so the great renewal can happen on schedule. That is the discovery at the heart of Ise. The real infrastructure is the cycle itself. The empty plot covered in white gravel is as essential as the shrine that stands beside it. Permanence is not found in a finished monument. It lives in the forest planted centuries ago, in the builders working today, and in the empty ground already waiting for the next shrine to rise. That thread did not snap when the ancient world gave way to our own. We still build for celebration, often on a scale the old empires would recognize. Consider the Olympic Games. Every host city spends years rushing stadiums, swimming halls, athlete villages, roads, and rail links into existence because the festival has a fixed date on the calendar. London built an entire Olympic park for the 2012 Games, and much of it remains in use today. A temporary celebration leaving a permanent district behind. At the other extreme stands Burning Man, held every year in the Nevada desert. Tens of thousands of people lay out a temporary city with streets, plazas, and monumental artworks arranged around a central structure. Then, within weeks, the whole thing is dismantled, packed away, and the desert returns. Same impulse, different outcome, for here the celebration is powerful enough to summon a city, even if only for a few days. The names, the gods, and the rituals have all changed, but the underlying drive is the one that lined a road with glazed lions in Babylon, carved a theater into the slope at Epidaurus, and planted cypress forests knowing the shrine would rise again long after the planters were gone. So what does that long thread, stretching from Babylon to the Nevada desert, tell us about who we are as builders and celebrants? That long thread tells us something profound about who we are as builders and as celebrants. From Babylon to Epidaurus to Cusco to Ise, celebration after celebration left the same kind of mark on the world. Not because rulers loved festivals, though many did, but because a gathering of people creates a need that only construction can answer. You cannot march a whole city in worship without a road worthy of the God you carry. You cannot bring thousands together in shared devotion without a sanctuary large enough to hold them. You cannot renew a community year after year and century after century without a place that makes renewal itself visible. And when the celebration ends, the stage it demanded does not vanish. It stays, reshaping how people see their city, their gods, and each other. That is why the pattern still lives. Every Olympic park, every festival city raised for a few weeks in the desert is the same instinct working with modern materials. We still build our best selves into the places where we gather, and those places long outlive the moment. So the next time you stand before an ancient wonder, ask a different question. Not which king commanded it, but which celebration demanded it. That shift in perspective changes how we see every ruin. The most lasting monuments of the ancient world were never just trophies of power or tombs of kings. They are frozen celebrations, evidence that our deepest instinct to come together in joy and meaning has the power to move stone and shape the earth for millennia. Which of these festival-built structures would you most want to visit and experience during the original celebration, and why? Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden connections between human culture and the physical world we leave behind.